Wild how often knowledge gets rediscovered. Civilizations rise, innovate, decline, and then centuries later, another society digs up the same discoveries and treats them like modern breakthroughs. But when you zoom out and look at the long arc of human history, you realize this isn't a rare glitch. It's a repeating pattern. Humanity doesn't move in a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment. It moves in loops, climbing upward, collapsing downward, and climbing again. Take the ancient Greeks, for example. They built mechanical computers, calculated planetary motion, and experimented with automata powered by steam. The Antikythera Mechanism, pulled from a Roman shipwreck off the coast of Greece, could predict eclipses, model the movements of celestial bodies, and track athletic events. For over 1,000 years, nothing like it would appear again. Only in the medieval and Renaissance periods did European clockmakers reapproach that level of mechanical precision. Humanity didn't surpass the Greeks. It returned to where they left off. Or look at Rome. 2,000 years ago, Rome engineered pressurized water systems, central heating, multi-story housing, paved roads, concrete harbors, and complex cranes. They used surveying tools that wouldn't be matched until the industrial age. But after Rome fell, the engineering knowledge that made urban life possible almost vanished in the West. Plumbing regressed. Architectural standards weakened. Windows shrank. Bathhouses closed. It took well over a millennium before European cities regained anything close to Roman engineering infrastructure. Again, humanity didn't rise. It relearned. This relearn loop also appears in mathematics and astronomy. In the 11th century, the Muslim polymath Ibn al-Haytham formalized a rigorous method of experimentation in optics, one that looks strikingly similar to the modern scientific method. His work circulated through the Islamic world, preserving and refining Greek science. But when they eventually reached Latin Europe during the Renaissance, they were treated like revolutionary discoveries, as if they had never been solved before. And it doesn't stop there. Water clocks, automata, surgical techniques, advanced metallurgy, even forms of steam power appear in records across multiple civilizations, separated by centuries, each discovery rising, fading, and then rising again under a different name, with a different inventor, in a different cultural context. Once you recognize this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Civilizations are not isolated moments of brilliance, they were carriers in a fragile chain of knowledge. That chain stretches across continents and centuries, but it's always at risk of snapping. When it holds, innovation compounds. When it breaks, humanity resets to an earlier point on the timeline. And that's why studying history matters. Not because the past makes us feel nostalgic or patriotic, but because it reveals how much has already been achieved before and how much can be achieved again. It reminds us that human potential isn't limited by intelligence. It's limited by memory, preservation, and continuity. But recognizing the pattern is just the beginning. If civilizations keep rediscovering the same knowledge, then the real question isn't how we innovate. It's how we forget. And to understand that, we need to look at how knowledge dies. Civilizations do not lose knowledge because they are foolish or primitive. They lose it because knowledge is fragile, and it depends on systems that are far easier to destroy than to build. A single invention may take decades of research and thousands of skilled minds. Yet the destruction of that knowledge can happen in a single night, during a war, a fire, an epidemic, or a cultural shift that decides scholarship is no longer worth funding. To understand how knowledge dies, we need to look beyond individual inventions and examine the infrastructure that keeps knowledge alive. Knowledge requires scholars to teach it, institutions to preserve it, archives to store it, a literate class to interpret it, and a stable culture that values the work enough to continue funding it. Remove any piece of that ecosystem and the entire intellectual edifice begins to crumble. One of the most dramatic examples occurred in 1258, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad, the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. Baghdad was home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated Greek philosophy, Persian astronomy, and Indian mathematics into Arabic, refining and expanding it. In a matter of days, an entire web of scholars, manuscripts, instruments, observatories, and correspondences collapsed. Some chronicles claim books were thrown into the Tigris River in such volume that the waters ran black with ink. Whether that detail is literal or poetic, the point remains the same. A civilization's knowledge infrastructure can be obliterated faster than it can be created. But war is only one destroyer of knowledge. Sometimes knowledge dies not with swords, but with silence. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, engineering knowledge regressed not because it was slaughtered, but because there was no longer a market for it. Central heating, aqueducts, sewer systems, and large-scale concrete architecture disappeared from Europe for centuries. Not because Europeans forgot how to think, but because the institutional and economic conditions required to support those technologies ceased to exist. Cities shrank, trade networks collapsed, and the incentive to maintain advanced infrastructure vanished. The chain broke quietly. Language is another silent executioner. For centuries after the fall of Rome, very few Western Europeans could read Greek. The works of Archimedes, Galen, Ptolemy, and Euclid existed, but they were locked behind a linguistic wall. To a society that no longer knew the language, the books might as well have been ashes. Knowledge doesn't need to burn to be lost. It only needs to become unreadable. Religious and cultural shifts can also kill knowledge. When a civilization changes its priorities, entire fields can disappear. Astronomy turns into astrology. Engineering talent is redirected from secular projects to cathedrals or fortifications. Medical science gives way to ritual and superstition. The people don a tea, become less intelligent. The society simply stops asking the questions that drive certain forms of knowledge forward. Then there is the collapse of specialization. Many ancient inventions were not widespread technologies, but singular marvels created by rare clusters of expertise. Hero of Alexandria's steam engine is the perfect example. He demonstrated the principles of steam power in the 1st century. But it led nowhere because there was no industrial ecosystem. No metallurgy for boilers, no coal networks. No markets demanding rapid transportation. No capital to scale manufacturing. The idea flickered and died because the chain around it was missing. Finally, knowledge is vulnerable to the material fragility of its own storage. Papyrus decays. Parchment molds. Ink fades. Fire consumes. Floods erase. Even modern digital archives face entropy. Formats become obsolete, servers fail, and data vanishes without redundancy. Humanity's memory is built on materials that are constantly at war with time. When you arrange these forces together, war, institutional collapse, language death, cultural priority shifts, specialization loss, and material decay, you start to see that knowledge isn't a permanent property of civilization. It's a temporary state of success. Every library, university, and archive is a victory against time, not a guarantee. Knowledge lives only as long as its chain remains intact. And that brings us to the most important question. If so much can erase knowledge, how does humanity ever recover what it loses? To answer that, we need to explore how knowledge is rediscovered, how it travels across continents, languages, cultures, and centuries to re-emerge in a new age under new names. If knowledge can collapse so easily, how does humanity ever recover what it loses? The answer lies in the way ideas travel, across languages, across borders, and across centuries. Rediscovery is not a single event. It is a relay race, where one culture preserves fragments of another, adding its own interpretations, improvements, and mistakes, before passing the baton to someone else. One of the most important engines of rediscovery was translation. During the early Middle Ages, Europe sat on the ruins of Rome with limited access to Greek science. But the Islamic world had preserved and expanded that same science for centuries. When Latin scholars in places like Toledo, Palermo, and Sicily gained access to Arabic libraries, they discovered entire intellectual worlds they did not know existed. Mathematicians encountered algebra through the works of al-Khwarizmi. Astronomers found refinements to Ptolemaic models in the tables of al-Battani. Opticians discovered Ibn al-Haytham's experimental method. Physicians found anatomical studies derived from Galen, improved through generations of Islamic medical tradition. Each translation was not merely a transfer of information, it was the reattachment of a broken link in humanity's chain of knowledge. The Renaissance did not begin because Europeans suddenly became more curious. It began because they reconnected to a library of knowledge they did not know they were missing. Scholars in Florence, Venice, and Padua devoured ancient texts as if they were revelations, unaware that large sections of those works had been circulating in Arabic for centuries. Rediscovery often feels like invention when you do not know who came before you, but translation is only one pathway. Another is reverse engineering. Empires and kingdoms often inherited technologies they didn't fully understand. The Antikythera Mechanism baffled scientists until the late 20th century, when modern imaging finally revealed its gear system. In a similar way, fragments of Roman concrete recipes, medieval Damascus steel, and early Chinese porcelain were studied and reconstructed long after their original production methods were lost. Rediscovery also emerges from the scientific method, through trial, error, and curiosity. Even without access to ancient texts, humanity gravitates towards certain ideas because those ideas solve universal problems. Fluid dynamics, optics, metallurgy, and astronomy all attract attention in societies that reach particular technological or cultural thresholds. Civilizations separated by oceans and centuries often rediscover similar principles independently, not because they copied each other, but because nature presents the same puzzles to everyone. By the Industrial Revolution, the convergence of knowledge preservation, improved metallurgy, standardized education, and economic demand ignited a transformation. Concepts like steam power and mechanical automation, which had flickered in the ancient world through inventors like Hero of Alexandria, finally found fertile ground. What changed was not the idea, but the ecosystem that allowed the idea to thrive. Coal networks, mass manufacturing, railroads, and capital investment created the continuity that ancient societies lacked. Even today, rediscovery continues. Modern medicine frequently validates herbal treatments described in ancient texts. Nutritionists promote fermented foods and grains once dismissed as primitive. Engineers admire Roman aqueducts and adopt water recycling designs reminiscent of qanats. Military strategists study Mongol logistics and Roman road networks. Archaeologists translate tablets that reshape entire timelines. Rediscovery never stops. It only shifts between disciplines. And yet, the most striking realization is this: humanity does not suffer from a lack of genius. It suffers from a lack of memory. Ideas are plentiful. Continuity is rare. Knowledge accumulates only when societies protect it, invest in it, and pass it on with fidelity. Without continuity, even the greatest breakthroughs can vanish into silence. So we return to the central question: what knowledge are we on the verge of losing today? In an age of digital archives, machine learning, and global communication, it seems impossible to forget anything. But the same was said about ancient libraries that no longer exist. Servers fail, languages die, systems collapse, priorities shift, and future civilizations may one day sift through the fragments we leave behind, rediscovering what we once knew and wondering how we ever forgot.